Sarah had no idea that the man she had fallen for would one day become the same person who would nearly destroy her. Adam, with his charm and mystery, had made her believe in a love that seemed too perfect to be true. But as their relationship spiraled into darkness, Sarah would soon learn that falling for him wasn't just a mistake. It was the beginning of a nightmare she could never escape, until she decided to fight back. Sarah had always led a quiet, predictable life. She wasn't someone who would ever expect her world to be turned upside down by a chance encounter. But that's exactly what happened the night she met Adam. It all started at a small gathering hosted by a colleague in the city. Sarah didn't usually attend these kinds of parties, preferring the comfort of her books or a quiet dinner with close friends. But something about that evening felt different. It was one of those nights where she felt the urge to step outside her usual routine and experience something new. The party was a blur of laughter, clinking glasses, and casual conversations. She was making small talk with a few acquaintances when Adam appeared. He wasn't immediately noticeable, but something about him drew her in. His eyes were intense, his gaze lingering just a bit longer than normal. He smiled warmly, and there was a sense of familiarity in his presence, as if they had known each other for years, even though they had just met. His calm demeanor stood out among the bustling crowd, and Sarah found herself intrigued by him. They exchanged pleasantries, and Adam's voice had a way of pulling her in, making her forget the chaos around them. It was like he was speaking directly to her, as if the rest of the world didn't matter. She found herself laughing at his stories, though some of them seemed exaggerated, as if they were designed to make her see him in a certain light. But she couldn't help it. There was something magnetic about him. There was an allure, a dangerous charm, that made Sarah's usual caution slip away. In the days that followed, Adam reached out to her. He seemed eager to spend more time together, sending texts and calling at odd hours, but never in a way that felt intrusive. He made her feel special, as if he truly valued her company. Sarah, who was normally guarded and reserved, found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone before. His interest felt genuine, and soon they were spending more and more time together. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, feeling her heart race when he called or sent a message. There was something about Adam that made her feel both safe and excited, as if she had found a place where her mundane life could suddenly become something more thrilling. However, there were moments when she couldn't shake a sense of unease, a nagging feeling that there was more to him than he was letting on. He was always vague about his past, offering only tidbits that didn't quite add up. He claimed to have worked in various fields from finance to real estate, but never went into detail. It was easy to overlook these inconsistencies because the man standing in front of her was charismatic, full of life and ambition. Despite her reservations, Sarah didn't listen to her instincts. She was drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. She told herself that he was just a private person, someone who had been through difficult experiences and preferred to keep certain things to himself. His past, after all, wasn't something she had any right to probe into, especially since he had made her feel like the most important person in the room. As they grew closer, Sarah's world began to revolve around Adam. He became her focus, and she dismissed any lingering doubts. She told herself that she was being cautious, not naive, but deep down, she was falling for him. The idea of love, of companionship, began to overshadow her usual sense of skepticism. In hindsight, Sarah would come to realize that it wasn't just love that was pulling her in. It was something darker, something more dangerous, and Adam was the gateway into a world she could never have imagined. As Sarah's relationship with Adam deepened, the cracks in his perfect facade began to show. What had started as an exciting romance gradually revealed itself to be something far more complicated and dangerous. The first warning signs came subtly, almost imperceptibly. Adam's behavior was erratic. fluctuating between overwhelming affection and cold detachment. One moment he was the charming, attentive man who made her feel like she was the only person in the world, and the next he was distant, lost in his own thoughts, barely acknowledging her presence. It started with small things. He would cancel plans last minute without explanation, or show up hours late for dates with no apology. Sarah tried not to let it bother her at first, telling herself that everyone had busy moments, that perhaps something was just off in his life. But over time, the pattern became harder to ignore. His mood swings grew more pronounced. He would often become frustrated over trivial matters, an innocent comment from her, a lighthearted joke. His responses would be sharp, his tone harsh, as though he were offended by something Sarah hadn't even realized. At times, his anger seemed to come from nowhere, as if a switch had been flipped. Sarah began to feel like she was walking on eggshells, constantly trying to figure out what kind of mood Adam would be in. She would analyze his every word, his every look, trying to predict his reactions and avoid saying the wrong thing. The dynamic that had once felt exciting and new now felt increasingly exhausting. She felt as though she were losing herself in the relationship, caught between wanting to please him and her growing sense of discomfort. One evening, after a disagreement over something trivial, Adam's behavior crossed a line. The argument escalated quickly, his temper rising with each word spoken. Sarah had never seen him like this before. His eyes, which had once held warmth and affection, now glowed with something darker, something that terrified her. He started shouting, his voice trembling with rage, and before she knew it, he was pacing back and forth, his fists clenching and unclenching. In that moment, the fear she had been suppressing finally hit her full force. She had always told herself that Adam was a good person beneath the surface, that he had a complicated past but was capable of change. But this was different. The look in his eyes wasn't the look of someone who was merely angry. It was something far more dangerous. It was a look of someone who might hurt her. To her surprise, just as quickly as it had erupted, Adam's anger seemed to dissipate. He stopped pacing and stood in front of her looking ashamed. His hands trembled as he reached for her, apologizing in a whisper. He told her that he had never meant to frighten her, that he had been under a lot of pressure at work and that he was just stressed. Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted to think that he wasn't capable of the anger she had just witnessed. But deep down, a voice inside her told her that this wasn't just a moment of stress. This was something deeper, something darker that she couldn't yet understand. The next few days were marked by a series of texts and phone calls from Adam, each one more apologetic than the last. He promised that he would work on his temper, that he would get help, and that nothing like this would ever happen again. Sarah, shaken but still deeply in love with him, decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. She convinced herself that everyone had their demons, and that if they loved each other enough they could work through it. But as she spent more time with him, she began to notice other signs that hinted at a life far more complex and dangerous than she could have imagined. Adam's behavior became even more unpredictable. He started canceling their plans more frequently, claiming he had business meetings or personal matters to attend to. Whenever she asked where he had been, his answers were vague and evasive. Sometimes he would seem to disappear for days only to return with excuses that didn't quite add up. Sarah's suspicions grew, but she pushed them aside. She didn't want to believe that Adam could be hiding something from her, especially after the promises he had made. But the truth was slowly creeping into her mind. Something was terribly wrong. There were small things that didn't make sense, like the way he would suddenly grow defensive if she asked too many questions about his past, or how he always seemed to know things about her life before she had even shared them. She told herself it was just a coincidence, that she was overthinking it. But with each passing day, the nagging feeling that she was missing something important grew stronger. She couldn't shake the sense that Adam was hiding something far worse than she could ever imagine. One fateful evening, after weeks of growing tension and unease, Sarah would come face to face with the terrifying reality of Adam's true nature. It was a night like any other, or so it seemed. Adam had invited her over to his apartment, something they had done countless times before. She thought it was going to be a quiet evening, just the two of them watching a movie or talking, but there was something different in the air. Sarah felt it the moment she walked through the door. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with an energy she couldn't quite explain. As soon as she stepped inside, Adam acted strange. He was unusually quiet, almost distant, and there was an odd tension in his eyes that made Sarah uneasy. He told her he wanted to show her something important, but the way he said it sent a chill down her spine. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should leave, but her curiosity got the best of her. Adam led her into the living room, where the lights were dimmed. The room was filled with strange items, objects she didn't recognize, pictures of places she had visited, and strange trinkets scattered across the coffee table. As Sarah looked around, confusion washed over her. Some of the items were so personal, things she had forgotten about or misplaced, like a notebook from her childhood or a necklace she hadn't worn in years. But what struck her the most were the photographs, pictures of her, taken at times when she hadn't even realized she was being watched. Photos from places she had gone with friends, moments she had thought were private. "Adam, what is all of this?" she asked, her voice trembling as she took a step back. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, and for the first time, Sarah saw a look in his eyes that she had never noticed before. It wasn't affection. It wasn't love. It was something far darker, something predatory. Her heart began to race and her instincts screamed at her to run. Before she could react, Adam moved swiftly, his hand grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. He pushed her down onto the couch, his grip tightening as his expression grew more intense. "You don't understand, Sarah," he said, his voice low and unrecognizable. "You're not who you think you are." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to free herself. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't the man she had fallen in love with. This was someone else, someone dangerous, someone who had been hiding something all along. She could feel his grip tightening, her breath catching in her throat as panic set in. Suddenly, the terrifying realization hit her. Adam wasn't the man she had thought he was. He wasn't a businessman or a man with a mysterious past who had just needed her love. He was someone who had been watching her, studying her, preparing for this moment. This wasn't a random outburst, it was something calculated, planned. And now, as the seconds dragged on, Sarah feared for her life. Just as she thought she couldn't escape, Adam's grip loosened. He pulled away, stepping back as if something had snapped inside him. For a moment he stared at her, his face contorted in confusion as though he couldn't understand what he had just done. I didn't mean to," he muttered, his voice shaky. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Sarah, her heart racing, struggled to find her voice. She couldn't speak. She was too terrified, too shaken by what had just happened. All the love she had once felt for him seemed to evaporate in an instant, replaced by a sense of utter betrayal and horror. She knew, without a doubt, that she needed to leave. As she bolted to her feet, Adam stood frozen, his eyes wide, as though he were watching a stranger walk away. But Sarah didn't care anymore. She ran out of the apartment, her mind reeling, her body trembling with fear. She couldn't look back, not even once, because if she did, she knew she would see the monster he had become. Later that night, as she sat in her car, still in shock, Sarah realized the horrifying truth. Adam had never been the man he had appeared to be. He had been lying to her, manipulating her, keeping her in the dark while he orchestrated his own twisted game. And now, with her life hanging by a thread, she knew she had narrowly escaped a fate far worse than she could ever have imagined. It wasn't over. She could feel it in her bones. Adam would come after her. But she couldn't stay, couldn't allow herself to be caught in his web again. This was the moment that changed everything. This was when Sarah's fight for survival truly began. In the days following her terrifying escape from Adam's apartment, Sarah was consumed with fear and confusion. Her mind couldn't process what had happened. The images of Adam's face, those wild, terrifying eyes, haunted her thoughts. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had narrowly avoided something far worse, but at the same time, she couldn't understand what had driven him to such madness. How had she not seen the signs earlier? How had she let herself fall for someone so broken, so dangerous? The first few days were a blur. Sarah couldn't bring herself to tell anyone what had happened, not even her closest friends. She was ashamed of having let herself get so tangled in his web, ashamed that she had ignored the warning signs for so long, but she also felt deeply afraid. Adam had shown a side of himself that was utterly unrecognizable, his violence, his obsession. She knew that if she went to the police, it would only escalate things. She wasn't ready to face that kind of confrontation. Not yet. In the midst of her turmoil, Adam reached out to her, sending a series of texts, each more apologetic than the last. At first she ignored him, too terrified to even read his messages. But then, the phone calls started. They came at all hours of the day, his voice calm at first, then increasingly frantic as she refused to respond. He begged her to come back, telling her that he was sorry, that he had made a mistake and didn't mean to hurt her. He claimed he was getting help, that he was taking responsibility for his actions. But every time Sarah read those words, her gut twisted with disgust and fear. The worst part was how convincing he sounded. He was manipulative, playing on her guilt, on the small part of her that still cared for him. He made her feel as though she was the one who had pushed him to the edge, that if only she had been more understanding, none of this would have happened. It was a mind game, and for a while, Sarah felt herself slipping. She wanted to believe him, to believe that he was truly remorseful and that the man who had tried to kill her was not the same person he had been when they first met. But deep down she knew the truth. The man she had fallen for was gone. The man who had taken his place was someone who had deceived her, manipulated her, and used her love as a tool to control her. She couldn't allow herself to go back into that darkness. She couldn't allow herself to fall for his lies again. Then, one day, Sarah received an unexpected visit. It was late afternoon when she answered her door to find a man she didn't recognize. He was well-dressed, calm, and polite, and introduced himself as a private investigator. He told her that Adam had hired him to find her, that Adam was desperate to speak with her to make things right. At first, Sarah felt a surge of panic, her heart racing. But then the investigator dropped a bombshell. Adam wasn't just anyone. His real name wasn't Adam at all. The investigator showed her documents, including fake IDs, bank records, and criminal reports. The man who had charmed his way into her life wasn't who he had claimed to be. His true identity was tied to a criminal underworld, a web of illegal activities that went beyond just violent outbursts. Adam had been using her all along, manipulating her into trusting him so that he could keep tabs on her, watching her every move, monitoring her interactions, and tracking her life in ways that made her sick to her stomach. The investigator went on to explain that Adam had been involved in multiple criminal enterprises, and his violence wasn't an isolated incident. He had been involved in numerous illegal deals, including drug trafficking and money laundering, all while maintaining the guise of a respectable businessman. The man she had fallen in love with had been using her as a pawn in a much larger game, and she had been too blinded by love to see it. Sarah's world spun. The shock was overwhelming, and she struggled to comprehend the depth of the lies. The man she had trusted, the man she had believed in, was nothing more than a shadow, a person who had lived a double life, one that she had unknowingly been a part of. She felt betrayed, humiliated, and violated in ways she couldn't put into words. The investigator assured her that she was no longer in danger, that Adam's activities had been exposed, and that he was being tracked by law enforcement. Still, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even though Adam had been exposed, there was a part of her that couldn't help but feel as though he was always just one step behind her, waiting to pounce. The investigator gave Sarah the option to file a police report, to officially go on record and ensure that Adam would never be able to hurt her again. But Sarah hesitated. She had already been through so much, and the idea of facing him in a courtroom filled her with dread. Instead, she made the decision to cut all ties with her past life. She moved to a new city, changed her phone number, and severed all contact with the people who had known her as the woman who had been with Adam. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a sense of relief. No longer trapped by Adam's influence, no longer caught in the storm of his lies. She was free, but the scars of her experience would remain with her. She would never forget the lessons she had learned, the price she had paid for trusting someone who wasn't who he seemed to be. Adam had nearly destroyed her, but she had survived. And in that survival, Sarah found a new sense of strength. As the months passed, Sarah tried to rebuild her life, but the emotional scars of her experience with Adam lingered, haunting her every step. Despite the new city, new job, and new identity she had created for herself, there was a constant unease that she couldn't shake. The trauma of what had happened, the realization of how deeply she had been manipulated, still echoed in her daily thoughts. She found herself looking over her shoulder when walking through unfamiliar streets, checking her locks before bed, and jumping at every unexpected noise. The world felt different now, darker, more unpredictable. Sarah had always been a quiet person, content with a simple life. But after everything with Adam, she couldn't help but feel the weight of distrust, as if the veil of normalcy had been ripped away. She wasn't sure who she could trust anymore. Could she trust herself? How had she not seen the warning signs sooner? How had she let herself fall into his trap? But as time went on, Sarah began to slowly heal. It wasn't easy. There were nights when she couldn't sleep, where memories of Adam's face, of his anger, would replay in her mind, making her feel trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. Yet, with each passing day, she found a small piece of herself coming back. She started going to therapy, something she had never considered before, and gradually opened up about her experiences. Talking about what had happened, confronting the pain, helped her take the first steps toward healing. It wasn't just therapy that helped Sarah regain her sense of self. It was the people she met along the way. Slowly, she began to build new friendships. People who genuinely cared about her, who offered their support without expecting anything in return. She took her time, carefully letting people into her life, learning to trust again, piece by piece. It wasn't the same as before. She didn't expect everything to go back to how it had been, but she could see a future, a life without the shadows of Adam constantly looming over her. Still, every now and then, there would be moments when Sarah's past would catch up with her. One day she received an email from an unknown address with the subject line simply reading, "I'm sorry." Her heart stopped. For a split second she thought it might be Adam, trying to contact her once again. But when she opened it, the email contained nothing more than a vague message of apology and remorse. Nothing that made sense. Nothing that gave her closure. It was as if someone was trying to drag her back into the past, to remind her of the chaos she had survived. It was in that moment that Sarah realized something important. The email didn't matter. It didn't matter if it was from Adam or some other person who still held some misguided hope of reaching her. She had moved on. She had survived the worst of it, and she had learned that her past would not define her. She was in control now. Though the shadows of her past would never fully disappear, Sarah understood that they no longer had the power to consume her. She had fought too hard to reclaim her life, to rebuild herself from the ground up, and while she would always carry the memories of her time with Adam, they no longer had the grip on her they once did. The last piece of the puzzle fell into place when she realized that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about taking back her strength, her sense of identity. She no longer viewed herself as the victim in a twisted love story. She was a survivor. Someone who had emerged from the darkness stronger than she had ever been before. Adam may have tried to destroy her, but she had survived. And that was all that mattered. As Sarah stood at the edge of a new chapter in her life, she felt a quiet sense of peace settle over her. She had faced unimaginable darkness, and now, the light was hers to claim. The journey ahead wouldn't always be easy, but for the first time in a long time she believed in her ability to face whatever came her way. And that in itself was freedom.